Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. We are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends. So come join us for secular, progressive homeschool resources, advice, and community. My name is Amanda, and my lovely co-host is...
Hello, I'm Megan.
Hi. So today we have a special guest, and we will be discussing all things SAT, ACT, and PSAT. Now, if you're currently homeschooling a peanut or a kiddo who is years away from the college-bound testing, don't leave us, okay? We'll be discussing healthy habits that you can start putting into place now with young learners that will help and hopefully prevent that crazy, junior year stress that so many families go through when it's time to actually really hit the road with college stuff. So we are going to introduce you to Whit here in just a moment. But first, our weekly tradition of keeping it real around here, right? So let's quickly touch base on our weeks. I know that you have been very busy, Megan. So tell us, what have you got going on in your world?
So I did a classic, Megan, where my kids were like, hey, can we do this thing? Hey, can we do that thing? And I just kind of looked at that date on the calendar and said, I'm free on that day, but didn't zoom out to look at the whole week and go, oh, that's going to make that whole week a really giant clusterfuck. And so I did that thing. So last night we were in Atlanta. We left on today's Thursday. We went on Tuesday to Atlanta, which is about a 4.5-hour drive for us. Drove to Atlanta for a speaking engagement with Jane Goodall that we got to listen to, which was super exciting. That was last night, got in the car right after it ended at like 10 o'clock, got back to Charleston around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And today, speaking of chaos in the everyday life, the dog would like to come in and podcast with us. Welcome to the podcast, Waffles. So, and then today, after we podcast, we are leaving to go to Baltimore because as one does, where the boys are playing Pokemon all weekend. But I'm super pumped because I'm going to go to the Holocaust Museum and to the Ford Theater and all that good stuff. So chaos, a lot of time in the car, but I have a good audiobook, so I'm good. How about you, Amanda?
Well, this week is going pretty smoothly. Last week, I didn't talk much about it, but so we've discussed before, I have all these health issues. One of them is an autoimmune disorder, and I had a crazy allergic reaction that kind of cascaded into all of these issues and problems. And so I'm finally mostly better and just like trying to take it really easy the next few days, because next week we have a crazy week of in the road a lot and driving and staying different places and doing all kinds of fun things, including the Gold Over America tour. I think I've mentioned that before, but I'm so excited. We're going to go see Simone Biles and Hesley Rivera and lots of great people. I'm super so yeah, just trying to like rest, right? Like take it easy and store up that energy so that we can tackle next week. So yeah, not too bad this week, thankfully.
Exactly. You got to charge that battery. So without further ado, we want to welcome to the podcast Whit Halley. So Whit has been an SAT expert longer than we've been parents. And when I was kind of gathering my notes for the show, I was thinking, I think Whit's been tutoring the SAT longer than I've been alive, because I have known Whit for the entire 43 years of my life. You were in the same apartment building as my parents, right? Before I was even born. I think that's how you all met. And so Whit's been in my life for forever, so we're super grateful for his time today. So, Whit, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your background in education, experience with the SAT. So, like a little like all about Whit segment, just to kick us off for today. How's that sound?
That sounds good to me.
Excellent. Go for it.
Just to start, the two of them have very busy people. I'm in retirement now, and I try to live by the motto to do nothing and then rest afterwards. So I'm not quite as busy as they are. And it wasn't in the same apartment. My wife started playing tennis with your parents.
At
And
the YMCA.
I met for the tennis, but we used to visit your house all the time. Anyway, I did start tutoring back in approximately 1972 or 3 or 4. But I don't remember that long ago because I'm old. And I started tutoring very simply with the downstairs neighbor and worked my way up to that. But in the interim, I was tutoring because I started teaching in 1969, getting a salary of $6,700 a year. And I worked my way up, then at 18 years teaching in a school in New York City, then working up to an assistant principal in one of the best schools in the country. I thought we opened that building. And then I finished off as a principal in an intermediate school, and finally as a principal in an elementary school. During that time, I tutored SATs and went through like 6 different versions of the SAT, that were extremely hard back in those days when you had to do antonyms and you had to do sentence completions and all that crazy stuff. And they revised the test 100 times, and I've kept up with that. And I'm up to the new iteration, which is the TikTok SAT, because kids don't read anything anymore. So they made it seem like it's a real way of reading, but you're reading one paragraph at a time. And so it's difficult, but it's maintains the way kids learn today, which is a brief test. Test used to be 4 hours with an essay and all the other stuff. Now it's down to 2 hours and it's online because kids don't like opening a book because it scares them. So that's basically my background.
Excellent. Well, we are thrilled you are here. We know in the homeschool world, there's so many questions about how do we tackle the SAT? How do we prep our kids? Because it's all on us for the most part. I mean, there's support structure out there, but more of it lands on us than if your kid was in a private school or a public school or something like that. So well, we want to maximize every possible minute we have with you. So let's start off with just the general concept of SAT prep, right? How essential is prep in your opinion? And kind of what ways do college-bound teens benefit from prep?
That could take the whole time we have, because that's actually the essential thing. People who believe in SATs and people who do not believe in SATs. I happen to believe the SAT fulfills a function that schools don't, whether homeschool children or public school children or private school children, and that's getting kids to think. The history of the test goes back to about 1914. I wasn't alive then, by the way. And back then, the test was a way to find students who do not do well in school but seem to have an innate ability to do well in school, and therefore should get the chance to go to college. They called the test back then, SAT stood for Scholastic Aptitude Test, that you had an inborn ability to know stuff, and therefore you should maybe, if you do well, go to college. Of course, there's questions on the test would ask things that were culturally biased, racially biased, and ethnically biased. So that test moved on to Station 2. Then the test was renamed the Standard Achievement Test, which meant that you could learn all the things you needed to know for the SAT, except again, it was biased and it was impossible to design questions that were fair to all kinds of people. And slowly but surely, they decided only about 30 years ago, no, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, to make it the SAT. It doesn't stand for anything. Just like the AC, it doesn't stand for anything. So I dubbed myself, I called it the Save Actual Thinking Test, because schools don't teach you, they teach you how to read. That's not actual thinking. That's just basic phonics and all that. And the SAT is a way to force students and force parents to realize that kids don't think anymore. And the new version of the test, in its crazy way, for kids who are adapted to the TikTok generation, it's a great way to get them to focus on thinking. Most people think the reading part of the test is just reading. But the way the questions are designed, it's not a reading test. It's a thinking test. Analytical reasoning, logical reasoning, drawing inferences. And I believe firmly that it's a way to improve your memory. Because if you try to read difficult passages and aren't able to summarize those passages, you do not have an ability to do the thinking that's required on the SAT. So it's Save Actual Thinking Test, and the other version is my Systemic Analytical Thinking Test. Also, schools don't teach grammar, and most people are not equipped to do grammar and usage, and yet there's a thing called Formal Standard Written English, which in college is the kind of writing that you're required to do. So when you say between you and I, it's incorrect, and nobody knows that. It's supposed to be between you and me. So to learn the stuff that the test requires for the grammar is actually a good thing, even though most people think it's awful that they have to actually do that. And they got rid of the essay, which now with artificial intelligence, the ability to grade essays could be done really quickly. In the 4-hour version of the SAT, they were essays. So my belief is that by taking an SAT, you are prepping for higher level thinking and making you a better citizen of the country. You can actually really learn something, both math and the verbal part, that is good for you and good for you for the rest of your life, and hopefully gets you to be a little bit more analytically, critically, culturally sensitive to citizenship and democracy.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know the essay section was gone. That's interesting.
No, that was going in the 3 incarnations ago when the test literally was 4 hours long, and you read long selections, which I believe in. But again, we're doing something different. They got rid of the essay because I think the grading of it was unreliable. But actually, they could standardize that now because it's doable and within the next few years. So that essay may come back in the next generation.
Yeah,
and that would be a godsend for teachers, because once that they get the AI version of grading papers, they're going to put that into the schools, And there's a book out now on that is talking about that. The guy who invented Khan Academy has a book out talking about how they're trying to get every student in the United States to have a tutor that's an electronic tutor, an AI tutor, and including grading the papers and talking to them about their papers.
Ooh, that could be a good book club selection, Amanda.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question to what you said, and then I have a bigger, more general question. So you were talking about how the test was initially designed to help find those students who maybe didn't do great in school, but had the aptitude and might flourish and do well in higher education and maybe should go on to college. But you hear a lot of stories these days about kids who maybe didn't have great grades because they weren't terribly motivated with whatever they were doing in school. And if they have a big discrepancy in their ACT score, that actually hurting them or counting against them in the college application process. Do you find that to be true? Have you seen that in practice?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You have kids who have a high GPA, high grading scores, and low SATs, and correspondingly, you have the few who have high SAT scores and low GP. But the issue is the SAT score is very reflective of basically how much you read and whether you've taken algebra 2, and calculus, and all those kinds of things. So the difficulty for colleges has been, is the SAT score reliable or is the GPA reliable? Mm-hmm. And the movement right now is to go back to the SATs because GPAs are totally unreliable and they can't find a standard which measures any kind of thing across the board with all students. So again, it ups the ante that kids who 2 years ago, because of COVID, were not considering taking SATs anymore. Almost all the colleges are coming back on board. And with the new test, the go-go version, I think you're going to find most kids in the next 10 years are going to be taking SATs. And also the corporations are using SATs now, pushing public schools to use them as a standardized measure of their academic performance in schools instead of reading tests for every state and every community. So that's a big movement right now with both ACT and SAT.
Yeah. So that's my next question, is the difference between the tests. And so this actually is kind of a personal issue for me, right? And about access. So when I was growing up, I did not take the SAT. Where I lived, it was the closest.
The Midwest.
Yep. I lived in rural Midwest, and
Right.
The closest place you could go, it was almost a 2-hour drive, and the tests
Correct.
start very early. And it just, wasn't a great option. And also, applying mostly to schools in the Midwest, you didn't need the SAT. The ACT was perfectly fine.
Right.
But can you explain to us the difference between the PSAT, the SAT, and the ACT? And is the prep different?
It's going to be a long answer. You were originally the SAT was mostly on the East Coast,
okay,
and the ACT was in the Midwest and the West Coast. But they became very strong competitors because capitalism is capitalism. Not to bring that up. And they both now compete in the same areas in the same districts. A few years back, kids were taking SATs and ACTs simultaneously. And the prep, very similar, because they had reading comprehension, they had grammar and usage, and they had the essays. And the ACT, though, had a science section. But I have good news for people now, because the science section nobody could do. They're discontinuing the science section. As of next year, that's gone. But right now, the SAT, the new SAT, the digital SAT, the TikTok SAT, is 2 hours long. It has reading comprehension in 5 different varieties: main idea, vocabulary, textual ideas, support things, logical reasoning, all the thinking skills that are there. Then the writing section has the grammar and usage, and they go through all the standard things, but they've actually made that more difficult. And the reading part, the little paragraphs, if you don't have a good vocabulary, you're dead. Because in a short paragraph, if there are 2 words you don't know, you're not going to get the main idea or the big idea. You're not going to get the contextual clues. And so you're going to get lost reading those passages. And if they just do standard test prep, which is, let's take another test and see how you did. Oh, you missed that one. Let's do another test and see how you did. Oh, you missed that one. It's not going to be anything really too valid. So ACT was stuck. I'll finish this in a minute. ACT is stuck with the long version of the test, like the old SAT. And kids are going, I'm not taking that test. It's 3.5 hours long, and I don't want to read something that's 2 pages long. So guess what the ACT is doing as of next year? They're coming up with a digital ACT. And it's almost identical. It's almost identical to what the SAT is. So the prep for one is the prep for the other, plus or minus a few things. And they got rid of the science section, which is the SAT is, the ACT is scored from 0 to 36. 36 is a perfect score. On the SAT, 1600 is a perfect score. Don't ask me why that's crazy numbers like that, but there's a reason. And the point is, to get an 800 on the verbal part of the SAT, you can basically miss, depending on the test, because it's statistical, at 800, you can't miss anything, maybe one question. To get a 750, you can't miss more than like 3 questions. But as it gets farther down and at the end of the bell curve, it works out to be you can miss substantial amounts. The average score on the verbal part of the SAT and the math is approximately 500. So if 75% of the people score between the 450 and 550 range on either part of the SAT, that's considered the normal thing. And most kids go to college anyway, whether they get a 450 or 550. But parents and homeschooling parents especially believe my kid should get a 700. But to get a 700, you can't miss more than 4 or 5 or 10 questions on the max. Whereas if you want to get a 550, you can miss 30 questions on the test. So that's part one. ACT is rated on 36. The science section, the average score out of that was usually about 16. So they got rid of that. The average part on the reading part is only about 19. But to do well on the SAT, the equivalent of a 700 would be like a 34. You can't miss more than a few questions on that. And again, the ACT is going to conform to that pretty much next year. So you take one or the other.
Sorry.
But unless the college requires it, I strongly recommend put your eggs in one basket and stay with one of the tests. Because the only reason people are taking 2 is because they're convinced by the capitalist companies that are supposedly nonprofit that you got to take both tests. I think the colleges, as they reinstitute a test, I don't think they really care which one you're going to take.
Interesting.
Is that thorough enough?
It does. So what's the significance of the PSAT? So especially for homeschoolers, should we be making sure that our kids are taking the PSAT before the SAT?
Great question. The SAT people came up with like 4 different varieties of the PSAT. Again, makes money. But the clean PSAT. If you were in public school, the old way of doing it was when you were in the fall term of your junior year, you would take a PSAT to see, it's a practice SAT supposedly, and you would see how well you do it if you need a lot of preparation to raise your score to get into the kind of school that you want. Most kids now take it as a sophomore and as a junior, and you only take it once a year. And they also have an 8th grade version of that test, which again, they're trying to make the standardized test for public schools as their reading test and math test. So my recommendation is, yes, take a PSAT, but don't get crazy on it. It doesn't go to the colleges unless you want it to. It's just something for you to find out and get obsessed over that you need to do more preparation. That's pretty much it. The SAT is the big casino. They do need to, you can do a practice test online and find out how well he's going to do. So, but if he's in school, they're going to say, you're going to take the PSAT and the school pays for it. And if you're on homeschooling, you're going to pay for it.
That makes sense. Amanda read a book yesterday. She binged an SAT book yesterday, and I only got kind of the Cliff Notes version from Amanda. And
that's an old one. That's an old.
It is an old one, but
it covers a lot of the material. I'm trying to I'm speaking fast so I can get all this out, but it covers a lot of it. It's a good book, but it's out of date now. It's out of date.
That's it. I mean, there are things that are out of date, but then I feel like there are a lot of fundamental ideas in it that still apply. You know,
underlying political issues and all that.
Yeah. So we had talked about reading it for a book club, and then someone had said like, "Oh, it's way too out of date. It won't be applicable at all anymore." And I was telling Megan like, I wanted to read it because again, I don't know anything about the SAT really because of my background. And so I thought this would be an interesting kind of crash course on what it looks like and all of those things. And so I binged it real quick before we met with you. So I had a better understanding of what I wanted to know. And it was a good book. It was an interesting read for a lot of reasons, right?
But the up-to-date book now is to read the one by the Khan Academy guy, Sam Khan.
Yeah.
And before we're done, I'll get you the name of that book. It's a great title. I just can't get it in my head right now.
No worries. We'll include it in our notes. Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, over the last 2 weeks, we did episodes where we deep dived online learning platforms, and Khan Academy was one of our favorites. So yeah, I'd be all in and reading more of that. So that's pretty cool.
The criticism of Khan Academy is that it's ultra boring. That for any given subject you're doing, there are people who've cloned onto the idea of that, and they're exciting teachers, and you're not limited to just Khan, even though he's done an amazing job.
Yeah.
But you can do some amazing thing also, finding, like, for instance, crash courses and Heimler in history and all those people, and they're exciting and entertaining, and they do a really good job too.
So the interesting thing is the way we did our analysis was Amanda and I did the adult analysis where we looked at customer service and we looked at the ethics of the company and we looked at what is the process of signing up and all that kind of stuff. And then we had our kids. I had Liam test on my end and Amanda has a 10-year-old. Now we both have the two kids that we had test are both twice exceptional, neurodivergent, information sponges, so that will skew a little bit, right? A little bit there, but
I'm gonna get to that. But go ahead.
But the interesting thing was their preference was Khan Academy, and I think maybe part of it is to your point. Their feedback was both that it was direct and it was there wasn't a lot of fluff. It was like,
that's true.
Just give me the information, because the ones where it was a lot of fluff, they were like, oh my gosh, just speed up already,
Why so many words? Exactly. Like, why so many words?
That's what I'm saying. Nobody wants to use words anymore. It's all visual.
And theirs was like, we just want the information. So it was funny because Liam was doing math on, was it Khan Academy? I think so, where he came out of the math class and he goes, oh, there was all this history in there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? There's history in math. And it was history of like Greek mathematicians, right? It related to math. It was multidisciplinary learning. But he was like, I just want to crunch numbers. Like, just let me really want to do math. And I was like, oh, okay. But I actually love the fact that it's multidisciplinary. I think that's amazing. So I put it as a pro and Liam put it as a con. But it was interesting because we were able to assessed 6 different platforms, with some with our kids and some without, because the ones we did without, we eliminated before we even brought the kids in. We were like, this place does not, they were racist, they were anti-LGBT, they were, all this kind. And so those we didn't even put our kids on, because why would we? But it was interesting. Khan was popular with our kids. They liked it.
I'm shocked. Because a lot of kids tell me they do the SAT prep and they're bored out of their heads with it. But that was more on the old test. Maybe the new one, it's better. And they're doing platforms working with the College Board actually to parallel the things as what's called a blue book, where you can take practice tests. And again, they're going to be coming up with the thing of the personal tutor for every student in the United States that tailors to the needs of the kids and all that. So as bad as the SAT is in some ways, it is something that at least statistically it has some validation to it.
It level sets everything.
Right.
Yeah. And I think too, that consistency is really useful. So we're in California. We homeschool through one of those homeschool charter programs here in California, where you are required to do regular state testing to get funds from the state. And to that end, we do CASP, which I'm not a big fan of, but CASP, you get a 0 to 4 in your different sections and categories, but that's the only information you really get. And so, how helpful is that? I definitely, from our perspective, I can see how an ACT score or an SAT score, where you had a bit better of an understanding of where they fell instead of just a, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not.
You brought up a good point on that, though. The bit with the 1, 2, 3, 4, as you know, goes back before you were born again, where the schools used to get A, B, C, D, E, F. You can't have F anymore. So they've decided to turn it into a numerical thing and make it 1, 2, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then the standardized tests conform to that, and they give you a rating of 1 to 4. But again, no feedback. And the original idea of standardized testing in general is to give parents or teachers and schools a roadmap on how to improve those skills that they don't do well on. But they don't do that anymore. Reports of the scores come in mid-summer, so by the time the kids are back in school, who don't care? We're starting from scratch. Interesting on the SAT note, because it's become more computerized, you get the score, and this is important, and you get sub-scores, and then you get a set of charts that show you what parts of the test you didn't do well on. In other words, keep finding the main idea, inference skills, vocabulary, incoherence in grammar and usage. But it does give you some indicator of the weak parts, so that if you want to work on those for the student's benefit and not just for the test benefit, you can at least address those target issues in your homeschooling. So that's one benefit, and ACT does the same thing.
Yeah, that's my jam. Maybe not necessarily Megan's jam, but that's my jam in homeschooling.
Okay, I'm so far into the hippie homeschool camp that when you said something about that they're looking for something performance related, I was thinking like interpretive dance. And then you were like, no, like an essay. And I was like, oh, that's not where my brain went when you said performance. I was like, We were in Atlanta yesterday and we drove by the American School for Puppetry, and I was like, "Ah, that's amazing!
I would love that.
Yeah,
I would love that.
And I was like,
But
"Puppetry performance, yes, please."
but you bring up another thing which has unrelated to this is the concept of the arts, and I am right now studying art really big for a different kind of position, but it was originally STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Well, it's now STEAM, and the A stands for arts, because thinking in the arts is not only creative, it's also logical within its thing, and it's a disciplined practice. And the discipline that you do in the arts is a discipline that carries with you when you do academic work. Plus, it energizes you, makes you realize that sometimes learning has a purpose. So there's a transferable skill, even though people don't believe in that. But to a large extent, they're finding people who are engaged in the arts and sports do way better in school, learn more, and retain more from having done that. So yes, stopping by at the puppet school is a good thing.
Yeah, I was all about it. I was like, oh, we got to add that to our bucket list in life. So, okay, is there a magical number of times that you've taken the SAT too many times, right? Where it starts to look bad when you've applied to colleges?
Again, you got to do the history. Back when I started and right through till about 2000, you usually took the test twice. The concept was you took it in your junior year, May or June, and they didn't offer earlier ones, and they didn't offer the August test, and then you took it in either October or November. And that was it. And the idea is if you took it three or more times, you were considered to be a little bit like paranoid. So most kids took it no more than 3 times. Progressively, though, because of the need to get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and all that, and then the tailwind of that, and the SAT and ACT putting out, now they have a March test, a May test, a June test, an August test, a September test, an October test, November test, and a December test. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And ACT the same. So kids feel it's just like Russian roulette, and they could just take it as many times as they want. And colleges, I think, know that. I think if it gets to a point where you're absurd and you have 12 tests, they're going to know you're nuts. But within, because that means you're spending your whole life doing SAT work and not studying history, reading books, or doing all those other things. So the yardstick is, I'd like to think they should take it maybe 3 times, because I'm never going to talk them back to 2. Nobody does that anymore. So 3 is a pretty good yardstick of how many times you should take it. And I think that's fair. And that goes to that question, I'm sure it comes to that super scoring. Yeah. Technically, it doesn't exist. It's one of those things. It really doesn't exist. You get the scores, and they get sent to the schools of your choice, and they get the whole score. They don't get, oh, he didn't do well on verbal, let's hide that one. You don't get to hide the scores. But the colleges, when they see the scores, if you've taken it 3 times, they can see your highs and lows. And if it shows that you improve significantly in one of the other ones, they'll performatively and individually decide, okay, this kid's I'll give him the highest scores. That's the super score. It's the colleges look at the high scores and say, that's the high scores, but they're still seeing the lowest scores.
So is the concept behind super scoring that it would only send them the best of the best from each section?
To only send the verbal part of that. That's going to come to that, though. The SAT, I did read an article that they're planning on doing that, letting kids do the super score. But right now, I don't believe they've gotten that far yet.
Okay.
Well, and it's like, right, the idea. I know I definitely took the ACT twice because I was completely unprepared. I had just recently showed this with Megan. I was completely unprepared for the English grammar part of it. I was the school newspaper editor. And so I failed the ACT version spectacularly the first time I did it.
It's hurtful.
I didn't put enough commas in, and I didn't, all of those kinds of things. And so my newspaper editor teacher had said, okay, you need to look at this book before you take it again. Right. And so that idea of fixing it, and the idea that kids would do it more than twice kind of blows my mind. But I guess I can see that in today's day and age. So just to do a quick recap and make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, you've got the SAT perfect score 1600, and that's 800 basically in reading and reading comprehension, and then
writing. And then the math part is 800 as well.
And then math as well. So like ELA and math essentially.
Correct.
But you don't actually have to be completely perfect to get the 800, right? There's a possibility that you could miss one.
Depends on the difficulty index of the test and how many kids take the test and how many kids get a 500, a 607. If they pre-test every question that's on those tests, and they can predict within a variable amount of certainty how many kids are going to get the hardest questions on the test. They rate questions easy, medium, and hard. Math part, English part. So they know how statistically the skew should hit. If 1,200,000 kids take the test, where they're going to score. But if it turns out the top scoring kids miss some of the questions they were expected to get, they'll make allocations that you can miss 5 questions, say, to get a 750 to an 800. Whereas on another test where everybody on the higher predictive level gets those questions right, they're going to make it so you can only miss 3 questions on that. But again, as soon as you get over 700 on both tests, or 33 on the ACT, you're pretty much constrained to not missing if you want to get an 800. You got to be pretty much, I have to be perfect. I just finished with a kid who wanted to do that. There is an interesting thing. Kids they practice for the SAT and they want to get a score. And think of, you play tennis, right, Megan?
I did, yes.
Right. And you took lessons?
Mm-hmm.
So you take lessons and you hit the ball over the net. A lot of people go to a school and they hit the ball against the wall and they hit the ball. That's called practice. But as you go up in scale in tennis or any sport, Simone Biles I'm thinking of, and it's the same thing with the SAT. There is what's called expert practice. And people who are trying to get high SAT scores or ACT scores or any scores in any subject don't just do practice and do homework and try to, yeah, I did that. They work on the parts that they have gotten wrong and find ways to only work on the things they've gotten wrong because they've mastered the basic skills. So now you get up to what's called expert practice, discipline practice, that you do it every day. I'm thinking Caitlin Clark. And you do what's called deliberative practice. I missed 5 jump shots from outside the 3-point circle when I was 45 degrees from the left side of the court. Now, literally, she does this. And she'll spend 3 hours taking jump shots from just that one spot. It's not like I'll take 500 shots today. That's just practice. She will only work on those things that need disciplined, deliberative practice. And to get that kind of score that you want, a 700, 750, 800, you're not just taking practice tests. You have to focus on just those things. I missed 3 questions on the main idea. I missed 2 subject-verb agreement questions. So you're going to do a slam out of 5,000. So it becomes a habit, what I call a learned generative mental module in your brain, and it becomes an automatic thing. And that's the whole thing. The higher you want to score relative to kids who are geniuses in their own right, you got to work at it. It's a learned skill. It's not acquired from your genetic disposition. So that's one of those important things. And
it's approaching it with a strategy, right? Instead of just throwing pasta at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? It's like there's intention.
There's standard things like a kid learns how to read phonics, and he learns how to read, and then he learns how to read phonics, but he doesn't go on from that. When you get to the 4th grade and they start doing comprehension questions, they just read the book, and answer the questions. But you're not thinking. You're just reading. So if you say, I got to get better at that, you're going to focus on how do I read better? And that's where interventions with parents and homeschooling and schools come. Are they teaching kids techniques of how to read better? And that's a subject. It's not just a skill, because I don't believe just this idea of, you're taking skills and it can be transferable to anything. It's a specific skill to the thing that you're doing. And sometimes it's transferable because if you're reading a lot, you can learn a lot about other things as well. So the better you read, the more you're able to learn other things. So become an expert at reading, and then you can transfer those skills.
Well, and I think we talked about the fact that, even if you're homeschooling a peanut, this episode is still applicable. And so that's one of those things, right?
Like, we're going to get to that.
We'll talk about it later, but you just kind of, and so I'm like, put a pin in that because we're going to get back to it. But yeah, like there's things that you could be doing in elementary school that are preparing
Absolutely.
This. So
yeah.
Sorry,
when I became principal at the elementary school, they were still doing whole language. Everything was whole language. And and all that. And I'm not against, you should read to your kids. You should read to the kids and have them a love of books. But it's like saying, you take tennis. Oh, no, I'm going to do baseball because I grew up watching baseball. You're sitting in your home and you're with your father. You say, hey, son, let's watch a baseball game. So you watch a game. Let's watch another one tomorrow. And you watch a whole season of baseball games. And you've learned baseball. You know what baseball is. And then in September, in the next season comes up and your father says, so, son, I've signed you up for Little League. I'm going to drop you off. You get up there and hit some home runs and you run around those bases and you catch balls. Has no ability to do that. Zero ability. But he watched baseball. And that's to me, that's what the whole language thing is. Sit and read. Make believe you're reading the book. Make believe you know the words. Look at the picture. Look at the picture.
And
What do you
guess.
think it says? And you're guessing. So the science of reading, this whole new thing with the science of reading, I tried really hard to get the teachers to lean into phonics because, it was sacrosanct in New York. You didn't teach that. So there was a book written, I was alive, in 1953 by a guy called Rudolf Flesch, because they were moving to whole language. That whole thing was started even before Lucy Culkins was doing it. And there was whole language. And he wrote a book called Why Johnny Can't Read. I still have that book because I helped open this when I retired. I helped open another school for dyslexic children, and they're doing a phonics program, which is discipline practice. And he wrote that in 1953, and he says this will be the demise of the public school system, trying to have kids make believe they can play baseball after watching a whole season of baseball. Basically, I know some people totally disagree with me on this, but the science of reading is a good thing, but then what's the next stage in that for teenage little boys and girls? So.
Not Amanda. Amanda loves phonics. You're speaking her language. She's all about it.
All right. So, did you listen to by the way, did you listen to the podcast on the science?
And I have recommended it on this podcast. I've told people they've got to go listen.
Good for you.
That's where
I think she's over the top a little bit, but the stories she tells there are so true. I mean, the children need a love of learning. If they can't do it, they're not going to love it.
Yeah. If it's a slog and a struggle fest, it's not going to be a love. Yeah. So I have a question that's a really practical question about this kind of new, you've referred to it as the TikTok SAT. So
that's my, I own that. You don't.
Yeah, okay. I'm not trying to copyright that, but before, right, you could get blue books and you did these tests, and there was a lot of discussion about the fact that you could buy other practice tests, but they didn't prepare you the same way that the official blue book tests prepared you. Are there as many options now for taking this new digital test, or how are people dealing with that? And those people who are having to do it right now, right? Because it's just come out. The digital test just came out a couple months ago.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And actually, Khan Academy, working with the College Board a year ago, was putting out practice material for that test.
Okay.
The answer is simply yes. There's a zillion practice exams you can do online and books you can get. College Board just released 8 practice exams or 10 practice exams in paper. I use my trusty, because this was the first one that came out. Barron's one, and I don't buy that theory. By the way, there are some terrible companies that put out terrible material, but if you're careful what you choose, most of them, especially with the new test, seem to be as difficult, more difficult, but usually not less difficult than the actual test. And the answers are fully explained and all that. So most of the major brands, Princeton Review has good practice material. Barron's, I stopped using them years ago, but this one was the first one out, and actually it's pretty good because they organize it so you can learn the sub skills with grammar and reading. And there are several others. The College Board has online a thing called Blue Book, and I think they have right now, they're up to 10 practice exams. And the answers are fully explained, and they give you statisticals, what you're missing and being short on. And ACT will be doing that soon. So, and ACT has its own big practice book, but there's no point in doing that if you can wait for the new test.
Yeah, if they're changing it, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that Amanda and I both have twice exceptional kids. And so there's so many people in the homeschooling world that have kids, ADHD kids, autistic kiddos, dyslexia kiddos, right? And a lot of them are pulling their kids because I know for me, right? So you're from New York State. As the public school system in the US goes, New York has a respected public school system. My kids went to school in Florida, right? So that was right. Yeah. So, right. A lot of us are homeschooling because the public school system in some of these states where the public school system doesn't quite have its act together, didn't know what to do with our kids, right? Like they were like, they're gifted, but they have a learning disability. What do we do with that, right? How does one handle those two ends of this? I mean, they had no idea what to do with this kid. So when it comes to time for the SAT, I know there's a lot of people who are homeschooling their kids whose kids need accommodations in order to kind of access information, learn, grow, etc. In your experience with the kids that you've tutored, are the accommodations adequate? Is it giving them what they need?
There's a huge paradox on it, especially when you talk about the ADHD kids. What is ADHD? They can't concentrate for long periods of time. So The accommodation is time and a half,
Make it
or double
longer.
time.
Yeah.
Make it longer. So kids, the rest of the classes get out at 12 o'clock. The old test it was a 3-hour test. The kids who got double time had 6 hours. So if they ADHD, they're sitting there for 6 hours. What good is that doing for the kid? I mean, if they break it apart into 2 days, maybe that would do it. Some schools, I think, do that. But the accommodations don't necessarily make things work for you because it's tailored to make you do worse on the test because you're taking double the time. I used to tutor a few kids who had ADHD, and I wasn't great at it, I'm being honest. But I would try to train them to take the test at regular time just because they just like every other kid, they wanted to get the hell out of the test.
Right.
So they would work at trying to take it on the regular time. And then when they had a time and a half, they still could not have to worry about it because they had all that time, but they could work at it at a much faster pace and feel more comfortable that they could finish in time and not just get completely crazy sitting in the chair. For the dyslexic kids, depending on the severity, they have people who read the test to them. At least in New York, they did. I don't know I think that's a state issue, but they have people who they take it in a separate room as an accommodation, and they give kids reading. Kids who can't write, they have somebody fill in the blanks for them. They make those accommodations. Sometimes you have to fight for them, and again, it depends on the state. I'm sure Florida wouldn't let the kid do anything and wouldn't give him lunch, but the accommodations, again, same thing though. As soon as you're singled out, you're a 10-year-old kid or 13-year-old kid, as soon as you're singled out and you put in a private room, I'm being treated like I'm special, but not in a nice way. And I just sometimes think those accommodation things are, and a lot of people, a lot of parents apply for special accommodations, not a lot, but a number, because they think, oh, this is an advantage for my kid. So they get the time and a half, thinking it's an edge to get a higher score on the test because the kid has more time, and he doesn't have any right to that.
Right. Yeah.
So,
but I mean, I will say I did a bit of research. That's my thing. And the statistics online show that for the most part, all kids, whether they need accommodations or not, have higher scores when they have more time on these standardized tests.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's that give and take, right? And in certain districts, right? Book that I had read, we were talking about, it's quite old, but she talked about how in the most wealthy district, there were way more kids who had accommodations and way more kids
you know how to play the system.
Who got
Absolutely.
longer to take the test. Whereas in the more lower income disadvantaged school that she went and tested, hardly anyone had accommodations and they didn't handle them well when they did.
And the kids who were in those lower districts needed more time because they weren't taught to read well and they came from families didn't read to them. They should have gotten the accommodation automatically so they could spend more time trying to understand what they were reading. But I have to say, just reminded me of something, because you like podcasts. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you guys listen to Malcolm, but did you listen to the season where he was talking about SATs and college preparation and standardized tests?
I don't know which season, six or
seven. You need brilliant, because he comes up with weird ways of coming up with stuff.
He does.
And his point is, one of the definitions, and the SAT did this when it first started, what is the definition of intelligence? And for years, and even to this day, it's the ability, the definition was the ability to think quickly. Mm-hmm. Now, go back to your puppetry. Is that what intelligence is? Mm-hmm. And he did a statistical thing with a bunch of researchers and all. And there are a lot of brilliant people who were very slow thinkers. Albert Einstein was not a quick thinker. Mm-hmm. And the idea of using the conceptual design, that a test that puts a time limit on your thinking, is not an adequate reflection on the diversity of kinds of students that exist in schools. And there is something about the idea of thinking quickly for certain kinds of thinking, but not for kids who, in general, want to work things slowly. Mm-hmm. And some kids write. I mean, I when I was in my glory, when I was principal, I could dictate, slam things out 100 pages at a time. I write now, but I'm way slower because I'm out of practice. And a lot of kids haven't even learned how to do stuff quickly like that. Mm-hmm. And they come from areas of the country where nothing was quick. So why do you expect them to suddenly walk into a room and go, bam? And it goes back to what Gladwell talks about, and it goes back to the factory model of public education, that the Industrial Revolution comes in and Model T Ford comes in and assembly lines, and basically all schools are run like assembly lines. We're putting out a product that's called a kid, the capitalist kid. He's got to be out there to make money. And so doing that, with this concept, we got to put the kid out fast. We got to get the kid educated. Got to make him take a test fast. So he's got to be like a 450 carbureted car. He's got to be fast. And that's the definition of his intelligence.
We
And
read
it's,
one of the books we read. Was it the dreaded John Holtz book, Amanda, where it talked about like we're raising a
so old.
it
That
was
is so old, that book.
we read it. It was horrific. Like it was such ableist crap, but we read it and okay, fine. But I think was it that one where they talked about like we're raising a generation of Jeopardy contestants, or that
Yeah.
it's just how fast I can spit information back out instead of the ability to think deeply or connect dots between multiple concepts and stuff like that. So it's the same.
And that's
same
exactly
thought
why I
process
think
there.
the SAT is valuable.
Right.
If you take practice for the test, going back to that first question, that's why it's valuable. If it can stop you and slow you down in practice to actually realize that you can't just read a bunch of words, say, I read that, and actually think about what you're reading and analyze it and see if you agree or disagree and attack what the author's assumptions are, that's learning how to read. And that's
More
learning
powerful.
well. But that's not fast. It's not something you do fast.
Mhm.
So
Okay, well, that leads in perfectly to my next question, which is we kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but what habits or practices should parents of younger learners be putting into place now to prepare their kids in a more organic way for future testing?
okay. See, I hate to be this way. This is a long answer. So please feel free to jump in and interfere with me because I thought a lot about this. And it goes back to when I was a teacher and I believed in this and things I just inherently know. One thing you need to do, another book you have to get is by E.D. Hirsch. He was the one who came up with the idea of cultural literacy, and I'm going to cover that in a little bit. But how schools fail, and one of the things is we teach reading skills, but we should be teaching knowledge skills. And I always talk about you can have facts without thinking, but you can't have thinking without facts. We teach kids how to read this generic stuff that has no content. And so when they're reading stuff, they just, oh yeah, that's easy. I answered the multiple choice question. They didn't learn anything. The content matters. And E.D. Hirsch gets into this significantly, that now a curriculum should be knowledge-based. And reading is part of the content of what they're learning, so the analytical part, so that when they read other things, they can think deeply, as Megan said, and get more out of what they're reading. We don't do that. So some of the things, read to your kids. Everybody knows that. Read to your kids. So everybody reads to the kids. Good night. Good night, Johnny. Good night, Mary. Nice. You read to your kids. Have anybody stopped and said, okay, I just read to you. Tell me the story in your own words. Summarizing. That old kids can't do that. I every time I start with the SAT, with the first paragraph, and I have them read one of those little TikTok paragraphs now. Okay, and the Old Testament were huge. So tell me in your own, what did that say? I don't know. I have no idea. And I guarantee you, the one thing you do, if you read to your kids, and don't try to do the whole chapter, read after about 3 paragraphs. Okay, so what's the story so far? And you're going to get, huh? The habit of just tell me what tell me what that was about. Tell me the story in your own words. Tell it to the dog. If the dog wants to know the story, tell it to the dog. And I can't do that. That probably is the most important thing you can do, because they're starting to actually think analytically, because summarizing is an analytical skill, because you can't think about it if it's not in your head. You can have facts without thinking, but you can have thinking without facts, and the content is the fact of what you are reading. So I really believe read to the kids, not just fiction and stories, but nonfiction. There's nonfiction stuff that's out there that has factual content. It can be exciting, it can be biographies, it can be all that stuff, but read to your kids. And then I used to do a thing when I had parent tutors come to the school, and you can't really train a lot, but it was read to the kid and have them summarize, have the kid read out loud to you and summarize, have the kid read silently and summarize. Notice the 3 different things you're doing. You're comparing to your oral and your oral, but all of it's about the mental thing of the reading is not the game. The thinking is the game. Going back to the SAT is save analytical thinking. And so if you ask the kid to read, that's great. Tell me what you read. Part 2. Kids spend all their time on TikTok. They watch series. Nobody reads books anymore. They watch series on TV. They finish watching. Hey, do you like the show? Yeah, it was great. You should watch it, Mom. What was it about? I don't know. Have them tell you the story of what they read on TV. They watch TV. What was it about? What was the best part of the movie? What do you think you'll remember a month from now? What do you think you'll remember a week from now? If you don't ask it, they're never going to get into the habit, the skill of remembering. And if you can't remember, you can't do anything with it. So if you're watching a movie and you go see Inside Out, which is fantastic, and what did you like about the movie? Oh, I like this. Can you tell me what the story is about? Because I didn't see the movie. Just tell me what the movie's about. most kids will look at you like, are you out of your mind? And if you train a kid before they get to the 8th grade to be able to summarize what they're reading, you're 90% home. You're not, for the SAT and for life. I mean, because that's the deal. College, read a chapter in a textbook, and then 2 hours go by, 3 hours go by. So what were the main points in that chapter? I don't know. I depend on the questions. I hope you can guess right. And that somehow there was a mental process when you put it in your brain that the brain's going to organize it for you and spit it out. And it will if you've trained yourself, if you do your discipline practice and do all those kinds of things. So fiction and nonfiction, summarize. And I have these mnemonics for all that. The 3T, 4C rule, which we taught you with, and the SMART system, which I invented. Kids read at a certain level. I don't want to read. That book's too hard to read. We have the greatest invention since the printing press. It's called audiobooks. I started audiobooks when they were little cassettes, and they were all shortened, and I have on my phone here, I have 1,700 audiobooks right now, more, I don't even know. And I get in the car, I listen to podcasts, I listen to all that stuff. Pick books that are a little bit harder than if they're reading it, because some kids still have decoding problems, vocabulary problems. But when you have a good reader reading a story, all those comprehension skills are there without the line difficulties of reading left to right and right to left. Again, read for 20 minutes. Tell me what you read. Tell me what you read. What was the best part of this thing? What was the worst part? Why did so-and-so do this? Ask the questions. They'll hate you for it, but that's okay. But just to summarize it, after a while it becomes a habit. They'll tell you the story. So again, audiobooks, phenomenal. Podcasts for the nonfiction parts especially, and I don't mean Dateline I'm talking about, you can do philosophy, you can do history. There's a thing called smart history, and these guys does narratives and reinvents things, and there's a drama, and you listen to the car, and the audio skills. If you think about it, when you're reading, you over the time of your life have developed an inner voice. It is your voice. It's Megan. This is Megan's voice in her head. It's your dialogue you have with yourself. That is your voice. And as you read audiobooks, your voice improves because you're listening to professional readers. So when you read the lined stuff, you actually read better because you have learned the intonations and the music of the words. Audiobooks. Am I going too far? I still have plenty more.
You're good.
There are facts worth knowing because you're alive. I actually wrote a book for my staff because kids don't know any history. They don't know any world history. So I wrote a book that in chronological order, I gave 200 questions on world history, 200 questions on American history in chronological order, and then gave things for each of the grades. You had to drum those into the kids, and hopefully the rest of their life they'll know, because there are facts worth knowing because you're alive. Because kids, I always start SAT with how many keys on a piano, because they all have pianos in the house. How many keys on the piano? And no clue. I'm not asking you. And we go on with that. Do you know that in the United States, with Election Day coming, they did a survey, and they do it every 4 years. Adults, kids, can you name the 3 branches of the federal government? How the hell can you vote without knowing that? Kids don't know that. And so there were things, come up with facts and get a game of facts. Go online because they give all the stuff out there. Facts worth knowing because that stuff, everyday factual stuff. E.D. Hirsch again. That was his whole thing. Stuff you can't read if you don't know anything. So I had a kid the other day. I said he couldn't meet me yesterday. So he said, can we do Friday? And I said, good, let's do 10 o'clock. And he said, can we make it later? So I wrote noon. You know what he wrote back to me? What's noon?
What time is noon? Yeah.
He's a high school kid.
Yeah.
What time is noon?
I asked for cutlery in a restaurant one day, and a high school kid was like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not knocking TikTok, but the kids are factually unhinged.
Right.
They're not connected to anything. So you can't read if you don't know stuff. And there are general science questions, and teachers, I hate to say it, a lot of them, not homeschooling teachers, no, it's different. But a lot of teachers don't know anything themselves. When I wrote the history thing, they want, can I get this to my grandfather? They can give me another copy of this. It's like, oh my God. And I had one of the superintendents come in one day, and the 5th grader, the teacher started saying, you want to see how smart my kids are? And they started asking these history questions. And he said, they don't even teach that in college. It was like the kids knew it. It was, but that's so facts worth knowing. The vocabulary of knowledge, I call that also. It's like you read and you have to have a good vocabulary to read, but the vocabulary also has to be knowledge-based vocabulary. Stuff. You can't understand a paragraph if you don't know stuff. Like if you never heard of Huck Finn, I guarantee you most kids today don't know who Huck Finn is. They don't know who Albert Einstein is. You know, and you can't understand anything if you don't know certain factual information. So buy Trivial Pursuit, not the sleazy one, buy the one that actually does history. And they had some that really just do history and just do, general knowledge on science and all that stuff. Vocabulary of knowledge. Then one thing.
Can I add to that too? Like, because I lead book clubs to teach kids, because I have amazing kids in my book clubs. They're passionate, they're bookworms, they want to be there, they're engaged, they come ready to talk, the whole thing. But if they come across like a Huck Finn reference and they don't know they don't look it up. They don't Google it. And I'm like, you have the thing right here. You just ask the thing. You don't even have to type. Just ask the thing. And so when I'm reading, I read for that stuff. And then we dig into it in class. And I'll bring videos or I'll bring articles or we'll read it or something like that, But
that's right.
That thought process of like, ask all the questions, right? If you're reading something and you're not sure what we read a lot of historical fiction in my book clubs because that's my jam.
Good for
you
you.
don't know what that historical reference is, go figure it out, right? Because the author is dropping you this little nugget. So like get the kids to be like, oh, what is that thing? I'm going to put my book down and look it up. Go for
and
it.
you can look up images now, and they have videos on it. Almost every fact there is, you can do. I used to go to the library once a week with a list of questions, and I had to go find the book. I tutor kids, and they're all the geniuses on the phones, and they say, I can look that up? Well, yeah, you can do that. They give you definitions, they give you the words, they give you videos, they give you images, they give you voiceovers, they give you podcasts, anything. It's all right there. The entire world, history of the world is on that phone.
Yep.
And so, last thing which is important. We teach phonics. And by the way, this is coming in the United States. The next part of the science of learning is finally getting to this, and I've been doing this for 100 years. What is the teenage version of phonics? That's a test question. It's called roots, prefixes, and suffixes. If you learn 50 basic prefixes, roots, and suffixes, not so much the suffixes, you have access to understanding 10,000 words. If you learn 100 basic roots, you have access to understanding 100,000 words. Doesn't mean you know the whole word, but at least there's a part of the word which is like the F sound in fun, that you can actually decode at an adult level what a word might possibly mean. And on the SAT, that to me is like hugely important because you're always going to run across words you don't know, especially since you don't read. So the phonics is a shortcut. It's like adult phonics. Learn those roots. And there's lists online. You can just look up phonics lists roots lists, and they're on there. They're in the SAT prep books and nobody ever pays attention to them. But they usually do 100 roots in the books. They're gold. Your arch enemy. Well, why is it an arch enemy? Because it has fallen arches? But it's the same thing. It's the root of chief or first. So anything with arch in it is to be chief or first. And even Philadelphia. Why is it called Philadelphia? Because Phil means love and Delph is friends. It's a city of brotherly love. And just after a while, again, it's not practice. It's a habit. Can you so learn the words that you don't have to think about it and you can decode, just like little kids decode with phonics, you can decode meaning at a higher level. And then studying vocabulary is much easier as well. So my big thing for that is teach your kids some roots.
I agree with that, except I feel like it's bordering on agreeing with my parents that I needed to take Latin, and I still am not ready. I'm not ready to go there yet.
the reason they brought Latin back to the schools is because that would be a great way to teach roots. That's absurd. You don't need Latin to learn the roots. There's basically, lots and lots of words have that, like disaster. It's a disaster. Why is it a disaster? Because dis means bad. Aster means star. In the old days, people said, if there's a bad star coming through the sky, it's going to ruin the earth or ruin my town, or the gods will come and get me. So just knowing that stuff helps you analyze stuff, and you go from there.
No, I'm all about that. Just today, this morning, when we were homeschooling, right, we came across two things. The first one was a character named Mortimer Good. And so there was a talk about what that means, right, and what that's foreshadowing in the book. And then it was very quickly followed by a reading passage where we were talking about the word magnanimous. And my fifth grader was like, why do I have to know this word? And I was like, well, first off, ask Alexa what it means. Like, I can tell you, but you can ask and find out for yourself. Right. This is important for you to practice. And second off, the reality is this is an SAT word.
Exactly right. But the magnificent, they know magnificent. So magna means great. Mm-hmm. And anima means life, soul, spirit. So if you are magnanimous, you are giving great good to other people. Again, I know I'm being pompous right now, but those kinds of stories, if it becomes a habit, they realize I do know more words than I thought I do. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
worth
it.
doing.
Right. And that's, that's the thing. He's a fifth grader, and we did talk, we do a little bit more advanced stuff, but you can start these things at a pretty young age, talking about these
Was he
things and looking
magnanimous
at it.
about your teaching him that?
So. We'll go with so this morning.
Oh,
It's a slow and steady effort to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. Yeah, I mean, we can do all those things. To your point about facts worth knowing, National Geographic makes these boxes. They sell them at Costco if you're in the
Really?
States. Yes, they're super fun. Your grandkids need them with. It's a box that's about, oh my gosh, I'm terrible at measurements. Maybe like 5 inches by 5 inches cube, and then maybe like this tall, like 8 inches tall. And they're broken into sections. So there's dividers in there, and each one has different themes. So it'll be like national parks, or it'll be astronomy or whatever. And then each card is a fact card. And so we would they always lived we had a camper van. The kids grew up all summer, every summer, cut off from electricity and running water. And we just camped in the national parks and state parks and whatever. And that was our dinner time entertainment, right? We had no Wi-Fi ever or any cell service. Usually in the Yosemite Valley, there's very little cell service. And we would break those out, and the kids could go through and they got to pick the topic, and we'd pull it out. And then when we did a card, they'd put it in the back of that section. And then, the next time we got to, they're great. And they're like $20, right? And they have them for different grades. They have grades 4 to 5, grades 2 to 3. So there's one on US presidents, and they're just fun factoids. And then sometimes you'll end up with questions beyond that then you dig into, and it becomes a whole rabbit hole. Yeah, as homeschoolers are known for, So
yes.
We're coming up to, we're going to do a couple of episodes in a couple of months about holiday gifts and stuff. There are every year that was a holiday gift in our house, was the updated version of the National Geographic thing.
And Trivial Pursuits.
Yeah, Trivial Pursuit is another good one. Although I did hear that Costco was getting rid of books, so I don't know. Maybe they don't have them at Costco anymore. That's so sad. Yeah. That was the best part. That and the free food was the best part of Costco.
Free? Oh, the free food, yes.
All the samples, you just run around and eat the samples and read the books and have a good day.
Yeah.
I love all of that. All right, so you had said one of our questions was about COVID, that the SAT kind of dipped, but 10 years, if you had a crystal ball, what does the SAT look like 10 years from now?
It's going to be electronic for sure. Probably by then they'll find a way that they don't have to have you come to a public test site, because they'll find a way to not make it's not cheatable, that they'll be watching you as you're taking the test on the screen. It'll probably be similar in format to what you have now, and maybe even shorter, because kids' attention spans will be less. And the subject tests, that they also have subject tests, and AP tests and all that stuff. I think you're going to see more and more of those advanced placement tests being filtered down to younger and younger grades. So it becomes a standardized universal curriculum in the United States. Some of that's good, some of that's bad, especially in areas where teaching is terrible. Having an AP test forces instruction to be improved, because even if you're teaching to the test, you're teaching a hell of a lot of knowledge. SAT and ACT are going to be competing in 10 years from now. I think more and more kids will be taking it at that time, and that's going to become the standard issue for schools. I think it's just going to be process a part of what public education and private education will be. That's going to become the standard, because you can't, especially now with the politics, you can't dictate a national standard. But I think some of the standardized testing, as it comes back after COVID, is going to become that standardized testing. And the tests are statistically more valid and reliable than the state tests in almost every case. So as bad as the news is about them, they are consistently better. And again, E.D. Hirsch talks about those as 3 books or 4 books on why they're valid. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's got the idea of the knowledge-based curriculum, testing, standardized testing that you can improve. They took a 4-hour test, and they worked out that they can make it a 2-hour test, and it's as statistically valid as the long test they gave before. Now, if they're right about that, think of what the consequence of that for instruction nationwide would be. Mm-hmm. And it might be actually fairer to poor kids and kids who get a poor education, that they can at least use that as a baseline for what all schools should be doing for teaching. I mean, I'm kind of positive about that. I won't be around to see that, so I'll monitor you from someplace up there.
You'll be here. We'll be knocking on your door, being like, "Can you update us about these changes to the SAT?"
Well, I always keep up to, and the preparation, by the way, to go from one of the old tests to a new is intolerable. I mean, because I don't want to just work or just say, "Okay, take questions 1 through 10 and see how you did." You got to game the thing. You got to be exciting. You got to make it a show and an entertainment, and so it's a lot of prep for that.
imagine.
I have to read all those paragraphs. But now that they're short, it's easier.
Yeah. Maybe they did it for you, right?
Yeah.
Not
Just
for
for
the
me.
kids.
TikTok generation and retirement generation, both being
Well,
served equally.
retirement degeneration for me.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a little tangential maybe, but so with kids who have dual enrollment credits, right? We're seeing a lot more of dual enrollment concurrent, so they have these college credits. Should they enter as a transfer student or go in as a freshman? And in those scenarios, how does the ACT factor into that? Or sorry, SAT.
Yes, either one.
Yeah.
Either one. That's a tough question. Because again, I think a lot of it depends on the individual. Is he mature enough to go in as an upper level? I think from my point of view and knowing kids in general, even if they're older now and they're 17 and 18 years old, they're still kids. And if they go in as a transfer student, they're probably taking classes with older kids and they're not getting the experience of what it's like to be a freshman in college. And I think as fearful as that is, I think it's worth their while to go in as a freshman, take freshman courses, which should be easier than advanced courses. And if you get college credits for advanced placement or those other things, you take college courses, you're still going to get the college credit. They're not going to just cancel that out. It's still going to go on your transcript that you've taken this course, and it should count depending on the school you go to, because some of the Ivy Leagues will not give credit unless it's taken on the campus at that place. But sometimes you can negotiate that. And so that works out to your advantage. But if they're not going to take it as a transfer, they're not going to take it anyway. So it depends on where they're going to school. So the psychological development of the kid, I think, let them be a freshman. Let them find out what college is like. And then if they've taken all those courses, they're going to jump to take advanced courses. They could probably skip a year anyway. I mean, the idea of what you can save if they get out in 3 years is phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's $75,000 to $100,000 at this point. So.
Exactly. That's a valid point. I like it. All right. So I will go back to one thing I meant to go back to before when you said kids don't read anymore. You are talking to moms of two epic bookworms. You would love the homeschool community. You would love it, right? I think
I was a public school educator. 33 years as public school, worked for the chancellor of the New York City school system. What are you talking about?
We took all the readers and we grew them and developed them and they're blooming. I mean, I will never forget, before COVID, we were at the library the last day before it closed in March of 2020, right? And I mean, it was picked clean. We went in and my kids had this stack of books and they weren't even taking them back after a while because they didn't know how to sanitize them and all this kind of stuff, And we were in between houses because we were moving. My husband had gotten transferred. We were staying at my father-in-law's. And I mean, my kids went in, they brought home 50 books. They were like, what are we going to do? There's no library, And I'm like,
you get a Kindle and you read on your Kindle.
Oh, my biggest reader who loves it has to be holding a book. It has to smell like a book. There has to be the physical action of turning the pages. He's an old soul in a 16-year-old body.
If you have a Kindle Fire, or even on an Apple phone or your phone, you can download Kindle. And for young kids, and going back to the facts worth knowing, have you ever seen the material that DK puts out?
Yeah.
DK for kids.
Their stuff's gorgeous.
You can't not learn that stuff by using those books. And on Kindle, it's gorgeous. You can telescope and you can do this, and there's subcategories and press buttons on it. And they're tremendous books. You can't do that without the Kindle. So.
Fun fact, if you live near a Scholastic warehouse section, you can volunteer at the Scholastic open book sales that they have. They have them like 3 or 4 times a year. You can do volunteer hours where you go and like reorganize and make the shelves look tidy and stuff like that. And for every hour that you work or volunteer, you get book credit. And so that's where all of and they have all the DK books usually. And so I had, when my kids were younger, like this massive section, and I didn't even pay for them. I just had to volunteer at the warehouse sale. So check and see if you have a Scholastic sale near you.
There you go, because you get the DK science, the DK brain book. You'll come out like a neurosurgeon. The kids' version of that is so phenomenally good. How synapses work and all that kind of stuff. And
I forget where it is in Florida. I want to say it's like Boynton or something like that. So it's
not
that far. I know it's not that far from you. So you got to figure it out. You can go volunteer and get all the free books you want.
I'm too busy learning to be a docent at the Norton Museum.
I love it, which is another fabulous thing. All right, so thank you so much for coming and joining us. But before we wrap up for the day, we want to invite you to join our Patreon account. Every month we provide a themed unit study. The September one, for example, which is when we're recording this, is about the labor movement, and specifically we're looking at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And
Oh, that's
it's
great.
got right, which didn't happen in September, but the Labor Day is in September, so there you go. It's a great way to expand your horizons with your kids' horizons, talk about facts worth knowing, right? And add some multidisciplinary exploration of different topics in there, but you don't have to go through and research all the books and all the movies and all the videos and all the articles and all that. We have vetted all of those resources for you. They're not whitewashed. They're not, in any way, and they're there and available for you. We also host
Most of my podcasts are from Patreon, just so you know. Malcolm Gladwell included. Most of them are on there. So
it's true. There's some amazing stuff on Patreon. I love it. I mean,
yeah.
my kids they follow different artists and different, people that do really cool engineering stuff. And I'm like, they love it. There are these amazing communities out there. We also host 2 live meetings a month. One is a Q&A on homeschooling. So show up, ask us your questions. If you're like, I just don't know what to do about this, that, or the other thing, or you can't pick a curriculum, talk to Amanda about that. She'll help you. The other one we host is a happy hour mom's night out. Come, we play trivia. We have fun. It's really hard to find like-minded, secular, progressive homeschool community, especially depending on where you live. I live in the South.
We didn't bring that up. We didn't bring up about the secular progressive versus the Christian homeschooling and the brainwashing homeschooling. And that's one of the big issues why I love what you guys are doing. I love what homeschooling is doing for most kids. But as a political thing and as a democracy and civics and what America stands for, why we have public education and why the founding fathers believed in it, was to avoid that that sectarian and that breaking down and turning religion into a weapon to use in schooling systems. So I understand where you're coming from, but I worry about the other people.
Oh, we do too, and we're in it. So yeah. Amanda
That's
and I
it.
swap posts from time to we'll screenshot something in a group and be like, this is why people think we're all like this.
Do you get people online that come after you for not being Christian homeschooling?
I think we scare them off pretty early on.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, every once in a while you get that hateful stuff, but we don't need to deal with that. Like, right. They don't get to suck up our energy. We're doing what we're doing, and they don't have to be here if they don't want to be. And we're happy to show them the door.
Yeah.
Good.
So yes, come and join us on Patreon. We would love to have you. We would love to be your homeschool support system, and it's super affordable. So Amanda has a recommended resource for us today. Let's kick it off here.
Recommended resources. Do you need more homeschool supplies? No. Are you going to want these anyway? Absolutely.
Right. So when we were talking about what would be a good recommended resource for this episode, one of the first things I thought about was the fact that we are getting back into school, right? And what resource in our home have we been using a lot as we get back into the swing of things? So I'm going to recommend that you pick up a visual timer. A visual timer is this great little tool that is hugely helpful when working with kids and teens on strengthening executive function and time management skills, right? So we personally have one. It sits on my kiddo's desk, sometimes even right on his computer to help him stay focused as he's doing a class or working through something. And he also has one that he keeps in his room, and he uses that to help him remember to tidy for 15 minutes when he first goes in to hang out in his room. So it's not me nagging him to do a bit of tidying. So if you're looking for something to help you with that and take some of the nagging off your plate, a visual timer is great for that. You can also use it in 5-minute increments, right? So my kiddo has been struggling with his math. They're taking about 30 minutes and he's getting pretty distracted and daydreaming. So he's put the visual timer on the computer and he sets it for 5-minute increments so that if he's gotten off track or if he's forgotten what he's doing, at the 5-minute mark, he sees the color going down, the color is gone. And then it's like, oh crap, I was supposed to be working on this really long math problem and I forgot, or I started thinking about something else, right? They're just great. It's a really gentle reminder for kids. It's not boring. It's not a digital timer that's going to count down like in the kitchen with some obnoxious beeping or whatever. It's just a gentle reminder to really help kids practice and hone in on those executive function and time management skills. So we are going to drop a link and a picture we'll have the link in our podcast description. We'll have the link and pictures of exactly what one we use that we found works really well in our home on all our social media channels. But yeah, I'm super pro visual timer. And I think it's worth looking into whether you're homeschooling or not, for schooling and for life, right? I don't know any parent who's like, no, I don't need my kids to clean their room occasionally. It can help.
I like that. And in our book club episode this week, we're going to be talking about the nuts and bolts of homeschooling. And there's some stuff in there about how to organize your day and stuff like that. So it kind of lends itself into this week's book club episode too.
Yeah.
All right. So our last end of the episode is our mantra. And we usually try to tie it into the theme of our episode. So our mantra for this week is prepping for the SAT isn't about acing the test. Sorry, Wits. I'll start that again. I'll let that sink in and then.
I agree with that.
Okay, good.
I agree with that.
I was like, oh my goodness, okay, there we go. So prepping for the SAT isn't about acing the test. It's about giving your kids the tools to walk in with confidence and a game plan. The score is just a number. Their potential is limitless. Did we do okay with our mantra? Does that align with SAT vibe?
You're learning this not for me, not for you, not for your parents, not for the school, not for the test. You're learning this stuff for life.
Mm-hmm.
Life. And by the way, the timer thing, I'll push your idea. The timer is a modified version of what's called the Pomodoro method. You may want to look up the Pomodoro method and adapt it for elementary kids. It's the idea of kids find it insurmountable to study for long periods of time. But if you set timers it's supposed to be 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break and do things in increments of 25. But for younger kids, increments of 5 is fantastic. Have a nice timer and give them a minute's break to do whatever they want. And it's a classic thing. They've done the research on it. And Pomodoro.
Yeah. Younger kids, shorter times, and ADHD kids, shorter times. Right.
Oh.
Yeah,
but with the ADHD kids, lengthen it as if you can possibly push it so it's a little longer each time or each week.
Yeah,
it makes a difference.
Right, help with some of those skills, right? All right, so Whit, thank you for joining us. It's more about the SAT than I will know in 10 lifetimes. So we are.
Do you have time for me to leave you? I had to have a quote ready for the end here.
Oh, go for it. We always love a
and
good
this will
quote.
cover what your point is. The quote is from a book called Jitterbug Perfume by a guy called Tom Robbins. Great novel. We're going way back, but this jumped off the page and I've used it for years. And it goes to everything about SAT, schooling, homeschooling, and I'll agree with you on everything, and you'll love this quote. If you take any activity, any art, any discipline, any skill, take it and push it as far as it will go. Push it beyond where it has ever been before. Push it to the wildest edge of edges. Then you will force it into the realm of magic. And when you think of kids, that's where you want it to be. See, learning is magic. So I just love that quote.
I do love that. That's awesome.
That's great.
Thank you for that. So thank you for joining us. Whit, I have known Whit all 43 years of my life. If you have some sort of burning follow-up question, put it in the comments. I know where to find him.
Great talking to you both.
Have an awesome rest of your day, everyone, and happy
You too.
homeschooling.
You too. Bye.
A great one.